Chapter 201, Alexis Fashion Choices. The next morning, Dominic woke to the servants bringing in clothes for him. Not an activity that he had expected, as all his clothes were in his storage cube, which was still hanging around his neck. Advisor, there is a meeting this morning with the gathered royals, and your presence was requested. Princess Alexis has chosen an outfit for you, and requested that you wear it exactly as presented. The maid informed him. Thank you. I will be sure to dress to the situation. Dominic agreed. The maid left the room, and Dominic moved to the ensuite to shower before getting dressed. In pirate cosplay, that was definitely what Princess Alexis had sent him. It even had a tricorn hat. Still, Dominic played along and got dressed in the outfit that she had sent, then noticed that there were 3 golden necklaces in the pile, including one with the Signia Royal Commission as an amulet. It was a mark given to privateer captains so that they were not arrested by Signia naval vessels at sea. Dominic moved his storage cube to the silk sash that went around his waist, and then noticed that the top 2 buttons of the shirt had been artfully removed, in case he didn't get the memo on what she was going for with the outfit. Prince Alex was going to start drinking early today. Dominic tucked a dagger in his boot and then stepped out into the main room, where he could hear quiet chatter. I don't think so, Prince Alex insisted as soon as Dominic left the room. Where is your sense of adventure, brother? They said that it had to be an official uniform appropriate to their military or noble ranking. See, I even gave him the proper privateer's commission. Alexis countered. Dominic, help me out here, Prince Alex pleaded. Dominic shrugged. I actually like the hat, but if it's that big of an issue, I can wear it later. The prince sighed, then shivered and shook his head. I didn't need that mental image. Just go change into royal sorcerer's robes. Dominic went back to his room and came out a few seconds later, which made the prince give him a suspicious look. You just took the coat off and changed it for sorcerer robes, didn't you? That's how robes work. Yes, your highness. Princess Alexis giggled, and her brother rolled his eyes at her. Fine, have your fun. The meeting will be boring enough that we might need the amusement of advisor Dominic dressed like a pirate in disguise to keep us awake. He relented. The maids were doing their very best not to laugh as they served breakfast, and then immediately after, a pair of men from the Natural Sons Regiment arrived with a soldier of the palace guard to escort them to the meeting. No hat today? The soldier on Dominic's right asked. The dress code is official uniforms. The hat isn't part of the uniform, Dominic whispered back. Princess Alexis was wearing a fancy gown with her paladin trade skill core hung on her necklace, while Prince Alex had chosen a Signia Royal Mage's robes, similar to the black robes that Dominic wore, but fancier to denote his status as both a prince and an archmage. I see that you fixed your nails as well. Very impressive, advisor. The soldier whispered. Dominic looked down, then frowned. When did his nails grow out to claws again? They weren't long, but they were pointed and jet black. Not the color of nail polish, but completely black. He was going to have to watch his own reactions today. Someone might be trying to mess with him and trigger a response from his bestial side that would disrupt the meeting and possibly some of the alliances that were being formed. They were among the earliest of the royals to arrive, but the majority of the other nobles were present, along with the Bostevirian princesses, who were still on the hunt for an appropriate marriage alliance. They appeared to be having some luck with a duke's son from Schiphol, which was a long way from her home, as his nation shared a border with Western Dagos, instead of Eastern, as most of the other nations present did. Welcome everyone. We called you all here because we have a situation. Prince Kaizen has again attempted to claim dominion over Dagos, and issued another round of invitations to his coronation. So, I believe that it would be wise to move up the schedule and hold the official coronation today, along with the public appearances of the new king. The official notices won't arrive from Prince Kaizen for a few days, and they're scheduled for later in the week. If we move quickly, he will simply look like a desperate fool. Viscount Boscombe began the meeting. Prince Alex cleared his throat. Signia has no objections to the enhanced timeline, but the other nobles didn't seem as sold on the idea. Let him proclaim all that he wants. He doesn't have any backing left. One of them insisted. Viscount Boscombe shook his head. We suspect that he is gathering the northern nobles to his cause. They have had no part in the war, refused to send soldiers under the previous king, and most of them faced no invasions during this renewal. They have not suffered the drought that the rest of the nation has either. In short, this is all a detached issue to them, and they see no reason not to back a puppet emperor who will do as they tell him. The Dagos nobleman who had spoken frowned, then looked at the gathered dignitaries. A quick head count showed that very few of the northern nobles had come for what was supposed to be a coronation ceremony, as announced by both the Viscount and the prince. If they hadn't known in advance that Prince Kaizen intended to betray them, at least one would have shown his face, just to hedge his bets. A few missing might be coincidence, but all of them being absent was too much to overlook. Chapter 202. Rushed Coronation. All right, I know that it is tradition to wait longer, in order to give our allies time to send ambassadors, but we will treat this as a delayed coronation on the original invitations. As if the traitor prince had never set a trap for his own countrymen. Viscount Boscombe declared. The other Dagos nobles needed some time to process this information. It was normally a week-long huge event for a new king to be coronated. However, under the circumstances, it wouldn't make sense to drag it out like that, even if their major cities weren't surrounded by a Signia army. Finally, one after another, they fell to their knees and placed their hands over their hearts as the foreign royals moved to the edge of the room. Long live the king! They chanted in unison, and then the new Duke of Albroles entered with the royal crown. It's the crown. The actual crown. I thought it was lost. Dominic heard some of the nobles muttering. The second prince winked at him, and Dominic understood what was going on. He had killed the previous king and taken the crown for himself until such time as he approved of a new king of Dagos. The duke came forward and placed the king upon Viscount Boscombe's head, then bowed to the new king. From today forward, the reign of King Gustav IX begins. Let the commons know, the new king declares a public holiday for the next 5 days. The new king declared. The nobles cheered, and King Gustav removed his outer coat, replacing it with royal robes suited to his new station. Then, he made his way to the balcony, and motioned for the staff to light a packet of paper that was sitting by the fireplace. Thick purple smoke began to billow out of the chimney, easily seen from anywhere in the city. The first stop was the balcony near the throne room, for the nobles who were not privy to the ceremony itself. Usually, that was due to space concerns, but today it was mostly the wives and children of the nobles in attendance who first saw the new king greeting them before he moved to the main entrance of the Albroles palace and waited for his advisors to begin the ceremony. Today is a glorious day for Dagos. King Gustav IX has taken the throne, the chief advisor declared. Then the new king stepped out onto the balcony, and Dominic tensed, prepared to block the first attack that came his way. Let me, Prince Alex whispered, stepping in front of Dominic. It would be a much stronger statement to have the Prince of Signia protect the Dagos king from traitors than some royal advisor. Predictably, the first attacks came from Albroles palace guards in the courtyard, who suddenly turned and fired arrows at the king. A king who simply raised his hand to stop the others from cutting them down where they stood. They were more valuable alive for interrogation. But to the commoners standing further away, it looked like the king had stopped the arrows himself. It wasn't unheard of for Dagos kings to have magic of some sort, but Viscount Boscombe hadn't studied as a mage, as it had fallen out of fashion a generation ago in the nation. The two guards were quickly captured, and didn't even try to resist as they were restrained. Dominic knew that they would likely have a suicide pill on them to escape torture. But it made a good show for the crowd that they were taken away alive and intact. A show of mercy by the new king. My people, I know that hard times have come to Dagos, famine, plagues, loss of trade, high taxes to pay for wars. But soon that will begin to change. The crown has developed better relations with our neighbors than our predecessor, and we will soon have an announcement that will bring not only peace, but prosperity back to both the commoners and nobles of Dagos. King Gustav declared. That was a grand claim, but the words were being repeated through the crowd. The king had a plan to deal with the shortages. A plan that didn't involve them paying more taxes to absent nobles. That was hard to believe, after all that they had been through. But if the new king said it during his initial speech, it should hold true for at least 2 years. That was the custom for all kings before him. From behind the king, Prince Alex slyly handed him a large bag. Dominic wasn't sure what that was about. Then King Gustav opened the bag and began throwing silver coins into the front garden, while the commoners cheered and rushed forward to try to catch them. It was absolute chaos, as he was throwing silver coins. But it was custom, and if the Signia prince hadn't handed him the bag, it would have been a smaller bag of copper coins that went to the poor, as the tradition was officially a gesture of caring for the downtrodden. The new king had a rather impressive throwing arm, Dominic had to admit. Some of the coins were making it more than 20 meters back into the crowd, so not only the group who rushed forward first were getting paid. Dominic noticed that the king tucked the bag under his robes long before it was empty, likely saving some of the money to pay the Albrol's palace staff and guards. It was clear by the response of the people and the state of hospitality in the duke's estate that there wasn't any spare coin to go around. The king returned into the palace after a few minutes, and the nobles followed him back to the throne room, which was being quickly renovated to suit the presence of a sitting king. Send out the announcements. I expect all titled nobles here within the month to swear fealty. We should know fairly soon which ones are still loyal to the crown, and which ones have chosen to rebel. The king declared. There was definitely going to be a civil war, Dominic decided. Prince Kazan and his faction wouldn't tolerate a demand of that nature, or that the royal signet and crown were in the hands of another. Chapter 203, How Dagos Survives. Dominic escorted Princess Alexis back to their suite after the official functions, so that the Dagos nobles could plan their next actions. Prince Alex was accompanying the Dagos delegation, along with a single representative of the other nations present. But officially they were only there to observe. Dominic would have liked to sit in on that meeting, as it promised to be an absolute disaster. King Gustav didn't have much of a nation left, with a third of it in rebellion and the other 2/3 either turned to banditry or occupied by Signia forces. There was a chance that some of the other nations would be willing to help, but an even larger chance that they were about to start making plans to parcel off the majority of Dagos for themselves the moment that Signia's troops backed out of the nation. They would never let Signia claim as much territory as they now occupied. If that happened, then Signia would become too strong. But that didn't mean they intended to leave Dagos intact. What should we do tonight? Alexis asked from the other room as she motioned for the maid to help her with her dress. Warm fire, a good book, and wait for the others to get back with the piping hot tea? Dominic suggested. Alexis chuckled. Not a bad plan, but I'm getting soft. We should spar. The maids in the room with Dominic looked mortified at that prospect. The chance that someone might be seriously injured while sparring was low. However, the chance that a princess would be injured while sparring was simply unacceptable. Though, if they knew how much worse Dominic was with a sword, they would not be concerned for the princess' safety. Your Highness, there are important social functions coming up in the morning. Please, you can't have bruises on your arms during the galas. What would everyone think? We might lose our heads if someone believes you've been mistreated during your stay. The maid in the room with the princess pleaded. That was a good servant, Dominic thought. She was saving him the embarrassment of having his ass hooped in public. So, instead of training gear, Alexis came back out in a dressing gown, and the serving staff brought them tea and croissants with chocolate drizzle. A bit of excess sugar, but truly luxurious in the circumstances. The chocolate had to be imported, but Albrol's was on the major river route between Axbridge and the ocean. There were advantages to being on the major trade route, and the fact that the old capital of Wavemates, the city of Kynwyn, was further upstream on the same river was one of the major motivators for the invasion. They didn't put any tariffs or restrictions on goods. Instead, they traded magical items for all the best, so only what they didn't want would make it to Dagos and the overseas buyers. Because the merchants wouldn't risk sending that much money on an extended voyage, the magical items used for payment were turned back toward Axbridge, leaving the Dagos buyers with none of the upsides of a wealthy and powerfully magical neighbor. When Prince Alex returned to the suite, he found them both sharing the same large chair, and initially thought that his sister had fallen asleep in Dominic's lap. But no. They were just reading the same tome on the history and lineage of the Dagos royal family, as written by the royal court's historians. Did you make any progress? Alexis asked as her brother sat down across from them. Indeed we did. We have negotiated an armistice and support deal that includes 5 nations. Dealing with the new king is much easier than the previous one. He is much more reasonable. The price is going to be incredibly high for the crown of Dagos, but it shouldn't be too bad for the common people. At least in the short term. You see, King Gustav has agreed to implement the same tax amnesty program that we are planning to use to repopulate the regions we wanted for reparations. With a few twists. There will be a 2-year exemption from taxes. Then for 10 years half the sharecroppers' portion of crops and half the noble taxes will go to the supporting nations, based on the share of the support they need to supply to keep the nation stable. Realistically, it's a losing proposition for everyone. But the benefit to international trade will be greater than the direct losses. If Dagos falls into a civil war, it would no longer be safe to send merchant caravans across the nation, which would only increase the need for a foreign military presence in the nation. Axbridge refused to have anything to do with it, even after I contacted their crown prince directly. He says that it's between us, and he doesn't care who the king of Dagos is, as he is willing to divert all his nation's caravans to go to sea through Schiphol. Alexis sighed. That doesn't sound much like an armistice. The second prince chuckled. Oh, but it is. Even Axbridge sent a magical message officially recognizing King Gustav as the rightful ruler of Dagos. Now, we just wait for the rebels to make a move and start a civil war. If the northern nobles don't fall in line, our armies will finish what they started, and those self-loading cannons on the airships have proven incredibly effective at shelling cities. The production of them and the armed airships has been quite efficient. So much so that I expect we will be asked to disarm them after the war. However, that will not be a concern for the 2 of you. After tonight's festivities, you are both being sent back to Signia City, so that father can formalize your marriage. If he doesn't do it soon, I can already see that we will have trouble. But more importantly, the estate that you are to be granted may become a target for rebellious Dagos nobles if it remains empty. There are still younger sons of fallen families, and we suspect that they may try to claim estates by right of possession, and then plead with the Signia king to make them noble citizens. Chapter 204. Suspiciously convenient. Princess Alexis frowned at her big brother. That sounds suspiciously like you're moving us to a backwater holding, as far as possible from any chance of violent conflict. The prince smirked at her. I've heard that it's a wilderness territory, with plenty of wandering monster issues. I am certain that you won't be too bored even if you are not caught in the middle of a civil war. Alexis smiled at the thought. Living in the woods with a bunch of paladins and hunting monsters for sport was a much better life than the royal palace with all its rules and oversight. While the posting might be seen as a punishment by many, both Dominic and Princess Alexis knew that it was just a different kind of opportunity, and perfect for people who didn't mind putting in the hard work to get things started. Prince Alex sighed as he realized that they had both stopped paying attention to the conversation and had returned their attention to the book. We need to get ready. There is an evening social event, as we managed to come to a tentative agreement today. We will also be sending you 2 off first thing in the morning, but without the natural sons, who are needed here to secure Albroles. Princess Alexis frowned at him. And without their royal commanders to guide them and keep them supplied with munitions, how are they to function if the city is actually attacked? The second prince smiled down at her. That's part of why I am remaining here. If possible, I will ask advisor Dominic to make me one of those most lovely mortar creation Magitech orbs. If not, the 4 that the regiment has now will have to be enough. Dominic sighed and handed him a spare Magitech orb. I always have more in case one is lost in combat. Here you can make all the mortars you like with that. I'm sure the regiment won't have any issue adapting to your command style. But how are we getting back? By truck or with an escort on mechanical horses? He replied. Prince Alex shook his head. By airship. One of the airships from my regiment will return to the capital to restock and bring supplies to Albrol City, along with additional funds to pay soldiers. You will return with the cargo airship, but I have prepared something for both of you. Alexis giggled and made a grabbing hand gesture at her brother, who handed her a small box, then an identical one to Dominic. The princess opened the box, then laughed. "You really do know me well, brother. Thank you." Dominic flicked open the small box and saw that it contained a lady's wedding ring. The second prince had prepared the wedding rings for their exchange in advance, fully expecting that Dominic and Alexis would need them, and that they wouldn't have prepared one in advance. The maids came in force only a few minutes later, with piles of cloth and determined looks on their faces. "Your Highnesses, we have been ordered to help you prepare for the evening's gala," the head maid insisted. "You're looking at me like I'm going to try to resist." Princess Alexis laughed. The maid looked a bit pale. "The Signia Crown Prince is here, and he requested that you be in full royal regalia." Now, Princess Alexis really did look like she was going to resist. The gaze that she was giving the pile of cloth was nearly hateful in its intensity. But Dominic found himself bustled out of the room by a pair of butlers, who also had piles of fancy clothing for him. "All right, my lord, let's get you ready for the evening's festivities. We didn't have a wavemate's ceremonial robe available. They were all destroyed after the nation fell. However, we do have a Signia formal outfit available for you. Now, which mask do you prefer?" the butler asked. Dominic looked at the two options that they offered, and then laughed. "I didn't realize that it was a masquerade, but I already have both fangs and horns, so we can skip that one. What about a simple black mask to match the outfit?" he asked. "These are the two traditional options, sir. They are the only ones provided by the Crown Prince." Dominic frowned. "We're being set up for something. I don't recall anyone in Signia ever wearing this to a banquet before. But given the option, I will take the simple golden mask." The butler fitted it to Dominic's face, then smiled. "Yes, that works well. All right, time for the outfit. This could take a while." They had a light linen underlayer, then two simple silk layers, then a decorative silk layer, all in the traditional folded style, where the different colors of the silk layers showed at the collar. Then he was given a cloak, held over his shoulders with a golden chain, a decorative sword belt, and a new scimitar with a scabbard. Then his hair was styled, and a black metal headband was placed like a crown to hold the mask in place. "You are ready to go, but we need to wait here for a while longer. The princess needs to enter first, and her outfit will take longer, even if she doesn't assault the staff," the butler explained. Dominic chuckled. The outfit was a pain, but he had to admit that he looked pretty good in it. He just wondered why he'd never seen anything like it before. The closest that he could recall were the formal robes that his uncle wore to welcome important visitors. They were in a similar style, but not nearly as fancy as these ones. They did still have dragons embroidered on them, though. Dominic stood, patiently waiting until the staff came and placed a veil over his head. It was thin black silk, and he could see through it well enough, but it was the very presence of the veil that triggered the memory in Dominic's mind. He did know this outfit. This was a royal wedding outfit. His royal wedding outfit. Chapter 205. Shotgun-free wedding. If Dominic hadn't already figured out what was going on by the veil, the fact that the wedding march was playing as he approached the grand ballroom would have been more than enough. By both Signia and Dago's tradition, the higher ranking of the bride and groom was the one who waited at the altar. In this case, it was the princess. "Good luck. You don't have any family here that we know of, so you'll have to walk alone down the aisle," the butler whispered. Dominic gave him a slight nod, and then strode confidently into the room. He paused at the entrance to the aisle. There was one wavemate's tradition that he didn't want to skip. Traditionally, when the bride and groom first saw each other on the wedding day, the groom would roar in approval, signifying his wholehearted acceptance of the bond. But wavemates' weddings didn't have wedding vows like Signia or Dago's weddings did. Tilting his head back slightly, Dominic felt the muscles in his throat shift, and he gave a full-throated roar. Not the human approximation, a proper draconic roar that shook the decorations hung around the room. The room fell silent at the noise, and then the soldiers lined up along the walls began to bang their ceremonial spears on their shields. The military version of applause as Dominic began taking slow, even strides down the aisle. Princess Alexis shifted uneasily as Dominic stalked toward her. That roar didn't sound like approval to her. Sounded like need. And the heat that it lit within her body was making it increasingly difficult to stand still and wait for him to make his way to the altar. Those slow, regal strides should have made him look like the prince he was born to be, stiff-backed and shoulders back in perfect posture. But the swaying of his hips, and the way that his eyes were locked on her behind his veil, were the confident stride of a predator stalking prey that has nowhere left to flee. Instead of using the stairs, Dominic took advantage of the monstrous strength, spell's passive strength increase, and simply leapt from the aisle onto the stage, where he took Princess Alexis' hands in his own. For a moment he hesitated. He had only recently memorized the traditional Signia wedding ritual. "My love, sorry I am late," he spoke, a hint of teasing in his voice. The nobles in the front row smiled. Those were only the traditional words for a bride walking the aisle. Normally, a groom walking the aisle would thank his bride for waiting for him. The bride and groom released each other's hands and turned to the priest, who had been sent from Signia for the occasion. "Today we join these two in most holy matrimony. By the grace of the gods, and the will of His Majesty King Alfred Cygnus, first of his name, I bless this wedding. First, bow before the gods." Dominic and Alexis bowed in unison toward the altar set up behind the priest. Second, bow to the elders. They turned to the crowd and bowed toward the assembled guests. Third, bow to your eternal spouse. Dominic bowed to Alexis, who curtsied to him, nearly making him laugh. Sure, it was a proper response, but a formal bow was still an option, and the curtsy was very out of character for her. They straightened, and the priest spoke again. "You may lift the veils." Dominic heard the room's hushed cheering as Alexis' veil was flipped up, but his whole attention was on Alexis, whose face was covered with a delicate golden mask. He could only see her eyes, as the mask covered the rest of her face, unlike his own, which left his mouth and chin bare. But those eyes were all he needed to see. Unlike the weddings of commoners, there would be no kissing the bride in public today. Well, not as part of the ceremony. Instead, the priest gave instructions. Have the bride and groom prepared rings? Dominic took the ring from a waiting butler and gently slid it on Alexis' finger. He had to be careful not to scratch her, as his claws had grown out on him again, but the ring went on smoothly, and then Alexis placed the black gold band on his hand. "Lords and ladies, please welcome the new Duke and Duchess of Westover." Dominic froze in shock. Duke of Westover? Were they giving him back his hometown? The Crown Prince and Second Prince were standing shoulder to shoulder in the front row, beaming up at the newlyweds as Dominic wrapped his arm around Princess Alexis' waist. This part was the most difficult part of the whole ceremony, Dominic thought. They had to stand here and accept the wedding blessings of everyone who had gathered for the wedding before they could retreat to their room for the evening, while the wedding party would traditionally play loud music and party to drown out any sounds that might come from the marital chambers. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Alexis whispered. "Like what?" "Your eyes are glowing. You look like you are going to eat me." She added, "Oh, I fully intend to." Alexis blushed behind her mask and pinched Dominic's leg to encourage him to behave. Whoever designed these robes must have expected that, though. The multiple layers took much of the force out of even her strong grip. The two Signia princes stepped forward with red paper envelopes in their hands. "Blessings on your union. May you find eternal happiness." They spoke in unison. "Thank you, brothers," Alexis replied, her voice a bit shaky. The two princes gave Dominic amused smiles, but didn't dare to ask what he might have said to her that would cause her voice to waver like that. They were satisfied that they had done the right thing. Their sister was safely married off. The King of Dagos had agreed to cede the lands they had demanded as war reparations. And finally, the King of Signia had granted the bride and groom not only a large peerage, but the highest possible titles to go with it. Now, they just needed to make it home to get started on turning the peerage from large to inhabited, preferably before the diplomatic fallout of the agreement started. Chapter 206. Wedding Night, our 18 Spice. Alexis fought the urge to wipe the nervous sweat from her hand on her dress as the last few of the guests came to give their blessings to the union. She had been torn between wanting to murder her brothers for springing this wedding on them, and thanking them for not giving her time to second-guess and doubt herself ever since she took her place on the altar. Dominic's wandering fingers against her backside were making it hard to focus on anything, and if it wasn't for the fact that her expressions were hidden behind the wedding mask that she was wearing, she was certain that it would have proven impossible to keep herself together. Behind the mask, nobody could see her feelings, her fear or her excitement. But none of the nobles would have shamed her for showing emotions at her own wedding. What she was more concerned about was that someone might notice the constant state of arousal that his presence had been keeping her in all day today. Standing here on the wedding altar, there were no innocent touches. No casual resting her head on the shoulder of her most trusted advisor. All she could think of were the strong arms of a dragonkin blacksmith and that damnable smile on his lips. The way that he promised to eat her, as if there was nothing else in his world but his desire for her, and the pure confidence to show off his claim to a room full of nobles when she knew full well that he wouldn't hesitate to kill half of them on any other day. Getting married in the Dago's capital was a bit of an ironic twist, she had to admit. A squeeze of Dominic's hand sent a jolt of arousal straight to her core, and Alexis looked up, ready to curse at her new husband. "That is the last of them. Wife, will you step toward me?" Dominic asked. Step toward him? Alexis took one hesitant step, and Dominic's arms swept behind her legs as he plucked her from her feet. "That will be the last step I intend you to be able to take today," Dominic whispered in her ear, then winked at her as he walked off the stage and toward the open door. The roar of the crowd increased with every step that they took toward their quarters, only fading as the maids closed the doors behind them. "Ladies, you may take the evening off," Dominic instructed. "Yes, Your Grace. Would you like us to assist with the bride's gown first?" the head maid asked. "No. I think I would like to unwrap my present myself." Alexis giggled at Dominic's lines, and the way that he eagerly licked his lips before he winked down at her. Blushing, the maids raced out of the room and locked it behind them. "You can put me down now." Alexis laughed, but Dominic carried her right into their bedroom. "Oh, I meant what I said before." The world spun around her as Alexis felt herself dropped to the bed, with her legs still held over Dominic's arm. The skirts of her wedding dress flipped up over her face just before Alexis felt warm lips kissing their way up her leg. He wouldn't. He did, Alexis realized, as pleasure like lightning shot through her body as his tongue found her core. Calloused hands gripped her backside as Dominic hummed, a noise that Alexis recognized as his thinking sound. This was her first time, but it was also his. Dominic had made it this far purely on bravado and excerpts memorized from her romance novels, but now he had to improvise, and that made her much more nervous than a surprise wedding. Surely he wouldn't try to do something crazy, just because he read it in one of her books? But what if he did? Dominic's hand slid under her back and suddenly her corset popped free as his claw severed the strings, so his head could nuzzle against her bare stomach as soft kisses pushed arousal to a near frenzy. Gently, Dominic sucked on her button, drawing a rattling moan from Alexis as she struggled not to beg. "Your naughty books were right. Teasing takes too much restraint," Dominic muttered, his voice nearly a growl as he gently worked to unfold the layers of her wedding gown, as if he was unwrapping a most precious present. "And yet, you've still got all your clothes on," Alexis whispered as he finally moved enough layers of dress off her face that she could see him again. Easily remedied. One pull to remove the sash at his waist, and Dominic shrugged out of all 5 layers of his robes at once, leaving him in only the layered silk pants. Sweat glistened on muscle in the candlelight, and Alexis frowned in annoyance as she realized that the needy noises she could hear were coming from her. "Just so you know, I've never—" Dominic began. Alexis idly ran her fingers over the warm curves of his arm muscles before answering. "That makes 2 of us." Dominic couldn't help but chuckle. It was a given that a princess must protect her purity, but the absurdity of the statement helped break the growing tension as he reached for the tie of the ceremonial pants. Soft silk puddled at his feet as Alexis gasped. I thought it was a joke." Something that they just put in the books to make husbands jealous. She whispered. Surely, there was no way you could do the things she had read with that? She wasn't even sure she could get her lips around it. Tentative fingers settled on the glorious specimen of manhood in front of her, and it jumped under her fingers. Just a little taste couldn't hurt, right? The noise Dominic made as her lips met his member turned Alexis' nervous frown to a confident smile. This was true power of a woman over a man, she was certain of it. Just a touch was enough to turn him weak in the knees the way that not even a cavalry charge could. Dominic desperately tried to focus on anything but that incredible feeling. He would not be the first one to finish today, and certainly not so soon. I need you, he pleaded, then nearly came undone as Alexis turned those blue eyes up to look at him without releasing his manhood from her lips. Then take me, she replied, licking the taste of him from her lips. Dominic wasted no time lining himself up on her maidenhood, then paused to savor the moment, shifting slightly as Alexis bucked her hips, as impatient as he had been a second ago. For the first time tonight, a lifetime of romance novels failed her. A stabbing pain shot through her core as Dominic entered her, and Alexis cried out in pain. Breathe, relax, and I am told that the pain fades after I am fully inside. Dominic whispered. Fully inside? He was tearing her in half. Alexis looked down between her thighs and realized that no more than the head was in her, but Dominic was gently pushing forward, then retreating a little, allowing her body to stretch and shift around him. By the time that his hips touched her thighs, the pain had faded to a delicious fullness and an aching need. More. I need you, she pleaded, eyes closed against the uncertain prospect of what the next thrust would bring. Pleasure, pure pleasure. Dominic's fingers circled her most sensitive nub as he pushed back inside, and Alexis whimpered under him. He was not going to last if she kept making that noise. Married life was turning out to be all right. Alexis smiled to herself as she pulled Dominic down for their first kiss as a married couple, their mingled flavors on their lips. The dragonkin had better have good recovery times. She had hundreds more ideas that she wanted to try, and that was without getting into the books from the prohibited section of the library. Chapter 207, Make Them Wait. The next morning came far too early. They were far from finished with each other when the maids knocked at the door and let them know that breakfast was ready, and the airship would be leaving in 2 hours to return them to the capital. Do you think that we can make them wait an extra day? Alexis pondered as she lay across Dominic's chest, idly running her fingers over his skin. Her husband now. But still, duty came first. All right, we will be up shortly, Alexis replied, then rolled over, intending to get up out of bed and take a desperately needed bath. Only her legs wouldn't support her. She was sore in places she hadn't known that she could be sore, and Dominic didn't look much better as he stretched out aching muscles. He turned to pick up his shirt, and Alexis noticed the crisscross of fingernail tracks across his back and sides. Who was supposed to be the dragonkin here? She considered using a healing spell to patch them both up, but couldn't bring herself to so easily erase the physical memory of their wedding night. You're going to need to use that healing spell. If not, you won't make it to the bath, Dominic whispered in her ear. And you? Dominic shrugged. It will heal by evening. I am durable that way. Alexis reluctantly healed herself, then wrapped a clean dressing gown around her body to head to the bath. Dominic casually pulled a pair of silk pants up to his waist and followed her out to the main room to use the other bath. Breakfast was already served, sitting under trays, and Dominic casually purified it as he passed by. The hot water of the shower was just what he needed, and the soft sorcerer's robes were gentle against his damaged skin as he joined the princess for breakfast. I am going to need to adjust the schedule for rebuilding the estate, I think, Dominic announced, startling the princess, who was lost in thoughts of the night before. Because it's Westover? You know, it might not be the manor house that you grew up in, right? The estate is named after the Westover River, and there are many abandoned estate manors along that section of river. Alexis reminded him. That as well. Though, I suspect that it will be the Earl's estate at Westover. The others are hardly suitable to be sending a princess to live in. but I realized just now that I did not budget in nearly enough time for marital duties. I was thinking with the mind of a bachelor. Dominic replied, "Do not say that to my father," Alexis admonished. "The man has 10 daughters and how many sons? Plus the children of his mistresses, who aren't counted among the lineage." Dominic reminded her, "That's different. The royal lineage needs to be continued. And I now understand why he is so enthusiastic about the process. But I can't say that I share his thoughts on concubines and mistresses. Just one princess is enough." Dominic agreed. The door opened, and the crown prince walked in. "On that note, good morning. I just came to pass along a message before you depart. The king will hold a noble title passing ceremony when you get back, though the title itself was official the moment that the royal edict was signed. Next, the army was camped at your new estate for some time. They have cleaned the area, and buried all the victims that they could find, both in the village and the estate. Finally, if the sorcerer has time on the trip back, the royal engineers would like design plans for the mortars and launchers so they can equip more troops. Do you have enough mana cores to get your primary spells to level 10? The king will request that you do that as soon as possible." Claudius insisted. Dominic nodded. "I will be able to increase the level to at least 9 before we get back. I will admit that I haven't focused much on making mana gems, but I have some cores, and regular use should have brought me somewhere into the middle of the 8th level already." Prince Claudius smiled. "Excellent work. You've come a long way in a very short time. Perhaps you will be able to handle the new level of responsibilities placed upon you." Alexis frowned. "Why does it sound like we're being set up for something even more complex and political than working behind enemy lines or helping negotiate an armistice?" Claudius patted her on the shoulder with a smile. "Because, dear sister, you are. You didn't think that it would be easy to win over the natives of an occupied territory and convince them to come live in the wilderness under the dominion of a king who's not their own, and a noble with no reputation that none of them have ever met, did you?" Alexis sighed. "When you put it that way, it sounds much more annoying than simply convincing people to move from the cities to rural farmland. That alone is difficult. But we will find the people that we need, one way or another. If needed, we can rely on the reputation of the Order and the new Duke's abilities with Magitech to convince the first few to come. Then we will send them back to town to sell their first harvest, and they can spread the word for us." The crown prince gave her an indulgent smile. If the princess asked, she would surely get assistance from their father to recruit for the estate. But knowing her, she would want to do as much as she could herself before she would admit defeat and request help. "That's all that I came to tell you. Enjoy your breakfast and don't miss the airship. They're already delaying their departure for the pair of you. Everything else is already loaded and ready to go. If you want to keep the wedding garments, I can have them laundered and saved to be sent with the next supply run," Claudius announced. "Please do. It might not be the sentimental memory that it is for many others, but I think that it will be a good memory for us to have when things get difficult in the future." Dominic insisted. Hopefully, he hadn't damaged the robes too badly when he removed them from her body. He remembered cutting the corset strings, as they couldn't just tie her robes with a sash like his for easy access. But he wasn't certain whether any of the actual robe layers were damaged, or where they had all gone. Chapter 208, Homeward Bound. Dominic and Alexis ate quickly, as the airship ride was long, and everyone was already waiting on them to be ready. Under normal circumstances, Dominic would have said that they could have come to get him as soon as the airships were beginning to load. But on this particular morning, that would have exposed the Crown Prince to secrets that no older brother need ever learn. "Crown Prince, we will be on our way. Thank you for having the airship wait for us," Dominic announced in his best formal tone the moment that they finished eating. "Relax, we're family now. Plus, you married into a dukedom. Or perhaps the princess married into your dukedom. I haven't seen the formal announcement yet. Either way, you're also a titled and landed noble of Signia, close to my rank for now. But one last thing before you go." The prince paused, and Dominic waited for him to finish. "I'm still not happy about you getting your hands on my sister." Dominic did his best not to laugh, while Alexis blushed and swatted at her older brother's arm. Prince Claudius just shrugged. I will have you know that I am still in favor of you joining a holy order and becoming a nun if you decide that marriage is not for you. Even when I become king, I will support it. But do you know what this impertinent man told me when I suggested it? He told me that battle nuns were sexy. Now it was Dominic's turn to give the princess what he hoped was an innocent shrug. Enough about my love life. Let's get going, husband. Princess Alexis insisted. Best of luck with the negotiations. We will do our best to stabilize the region we've been granted by the king. Dominic added. The airship captain looked visibly relieved when Dominic and Alexis rode out to the edge of the city, with Commander Dax and a pair of cavalry escorting them. Your Highness, Duke Wistover, it's an honor to have you on board. We will depart immediately, the captain announced. The statement was redundant, as the crew was already starting to prepare to ascend. They had learned that it was more efficient to not reduce lift, but to hold the airship down with thrust from the propellers. So, as soon as they untied the mooring lines and rotated the direction of thrust, the airship rapidly began to ascend. Is it still viewed as unsafe to be near the ground? Dominic asked. The captain smiled. You could call it a wartime superstition. No Cygnia airship has been lost above 1,000 meters above the ground. So, we move high and fast, where no other nation's airships can easily ambush us, and where we will normally have the advantage of altitude if we do have to fight. The airship had 3 drive assemblies on each side instead of 2, like the ones that they had upgraded at Burton Head. It was made for larger capacity cargo movements, but with a higher top speed and better performance toward the wind. You might as well get comfortable, Highness, Your Grace. It's 2 days to the capital, and there isn't much to do on board. The captain informed them as the airship continued on its course. There also weren't any private rooms aboard the cargo airship, a fact that Crown Prince Claudius had assuredly known when he chose to send them back on one. Fortunately, both Alexis and Dominic had brought entertainment in the form of books, and they could be easily entertained. The princess was absorbed in a romance novel she had found, while Dominic was reading up on all of the little details that came with operating a manor and estate so that he wasn't caught unaware when something inevitably came up. The king wanted to announce the appointment directly, and the addition of a new dukedom to the kingdom was no small event, both from a political and territorial standpoint. The airship shook too much for Dominic to do any precision work, so there would be no creation of new Magitech orbs while they were moving at full speed. But Dominic did make a copy of the blueprint for his recent work to give to Pops, then a second one for the king. It was best to come with a gift of some sort if you were summoned to the capital, even if you lived there. With the work done on the first day, the second day was left entirely to relaxation as they crossed from Dagos back into Cygnia. There hadn't been much risk on this flight, with the armies well behind them. But just being back over friendly airspace let the crew breathe a sigh of relief. Princess, there will be staff waiting at the docks to help you prepare for the meeting with the king. The radio man reports that your presence is requested immediately after landing. Lord Sorcerer, it's been a pleasure to have you on board. Fortunately, we didn't need to demonstrate our abilities with the auto-loading cannons today. The airship's captain informed them as the city came into sight. What is the range on the radios? I've noticed lately that we are very close when orders get relayed. Dominic asked. About 30 kilometers? Give or take. The further up you are, the easier it is to get and relay a signal. But the radios were designed before the Magitech trucks were, when 30 kilometers was half a day by horse or a full day for infantry. Now that we're using airships, they don't feel quite as impressive. After all, you can see another airship on the horizon from that distance, and they might not be able to hear you. The captain replied. I will talk to the engineers and see if we can do anything to upgrade that. And I will try to get actual radios in the trucks, not just receivers. That was a real pain when we forgot to pack a backpack portable unit with us on this trip. The crew of the airship chuckled. Units losing their radios was a common thing during the war with Dagos. The radio was often targeted in order to cut off communications. In more established positions, lines would be run. But in a constantly moving battlefield, that simply wasn't practical. Even though anyone could hear a radio transmission. Chapter 209, Back in the Capital. The airship touched down at the Cygnia city docks. and the princess was bustled out by a half-dozen maids, in order to get her ready for the meeting. "Lord Dominic, if you will follow me, please. The dress code is military formal. There is a dressing room for the gentlemen as well." An armorer informed him, then winked at Dominic. They worked together in the forge, so they were far from strangers, even if they had only spoken a few words to each other. "You get off easy today. My gear hasn't taken any damage, and I already polished it." Dominic laughed as he stepped into the changing room and took out everything for one final check before getting dressed. "I've got the high shine coating if you want. Just a bit of extra sparkle for your big day." Dominic shrugged. "Why not? I suspect there will be a big show of officially promoting my rank, with guests and maybe even one of those fancy photographers." The armorer nodded. "2 photographers, I hear. They've developed a process for color photographs, so the king has been requesting both copies lately. The color doesn't last long, I hear. Some of the test pictures are already fading. But the black and white ones haven't changed in 50 years. You can probably get a print to take with you." Dominic nodded. "Just a shame that I can't steal staff to go with me. Setting up an all-new estate will be a nightmare." The armorer smiled. This was just the sort of gossip he had been hoping for. "Oh? You already know where he's going to assign you?" Dominic shook his head. "Not exactly, but I know what title he's given me, and it doesn't take a genius to figure it out from there. Plus, one of the challenges of the courtship was to build an estate from nothing but an empty house. You keep up like this, and we will have to go from calling you Lord Sorcerer to Your Grace, or even Your Highness." "Wait, he didn't appoint you as a prince consort, did he? Should I be calling you Your Highness?" Just the thought of this awkward smithy worker calling him Your Highness made Dominic laugh. "No, but if they're being formal, you might have to call me Your Grace. According to the Crown Prince, His Majesty intends to name me the Duke of Westover." "Oh, an estate in the old Wavemates territory for the Wavemates sorcerer? That makes a lot of sense, actually. I should have bet on that." The armorer sighed. "Who has it?" "Pops, of course. If I didn't know that it was impossible, I would swear that old dwarf was psychic. I don't think that he's lost a bet since he took over as master of the forge. We've got a bet going on whether he will resign his post to return to his forge when the war ends, but if you're moving to the frontier, I might wager on him following you, just so that the royal smithy can't come knocking on his door so easily." Dominic laughed. That smithy by the staging area has been in his family for generations. Unless he's got a cousin or someone who can take it over for him, he's not going to let it sit empty any longer than he has to. The armorer nodded, then started to apply shine to the outer armor pieces of Dominic's ensemble. "All right, that's as good as it will get in the time that we have. The king must not be kept waiting, and even if the princess isn't ready, we should get you to the throne room." "All right. She won't be long. If it's military formal, she will also be in armor, so it takes less time to get into than the fancy gowns." Dominic agreed. The notion that the many layers of clothing that the noble ladies wore could be more difficult than armor to get into made the armorer chuckle. But he was an unmarried man from a common family. He had never actually seen the process firsthand. If it was a particularly fancy event, the gown would be literally stitched together after the wearer was in it so that the fit was flawless. Dominic stepped out of the dressing room and heard Alexis cursing at her maids as they were apparently trying to style her hair. "Walk faster. Trust me, you don't want to be here when she comes out if she's not happy with her hair," Dominic whispered. The problem was the reverse of most noblewomen, in that the princess didn't like all the fancy pins and ornaments in her hair. She said that it made her head heavy, and everything had to be removed to put a helmet on, which was a safety hazard. They had a long trip to the throne room, though. The airship docks were at the shore, and the royal palace had only sent one carriage for the new arrivals. "Looks like we can't escape so easily. If your duty is done, you can relax now," Dominic informed the armorer, who had been pressed into service as his assistant. "Not until we get back. My ride is behind yours, and they won't leave until you do. Which means I get to ride back with the ladies' maids, which might not be all bad." Alexis came out a few minutes behind them in what Dominic could only describe as a wedding dress with plate armor. It even had the lace veil. Honestly, it was quite nice. One day he would have to ask her to wear that outfit again. I should have gotten fancier clothing, Dominic joked as he extended his arm to help her into the carriage. Someone is going to hear about this choice, Alexis replied, then flicked at the veil in annoyance. My lady, please. If you continue to tug at it, the veil will pull free. The maid pleaded. And that meant it would mess up her hair, Dominic assumed, or she would have removed it already. Chapter 210. Welcome home. The carriage kept a leisurely pace to the palace, in direct contrast to the rush that the staff were in to get them ready for the trip. Trumpets sounded as they arrived at the palace gates, and Princess Alexis sighed. That's the formal tone for a duke. They want you to exit first and greet the king's advisors. Then I will exit second. Now, she was definitely not happy. As an unwed princess, she should have exited first. But as a duke's wife, she was introduced second, the same way as their children would be. Only if she arrived without her husband would she be introduced ahead of all the other dukes and duchesses. There was no formal announcement of name and title as Dominic stepped down, but the king's closest advisors, including Morgana, were there to greet him. Welcome home, the techno which whispered as Dominic reached her spot in the line. For now, at least, Dominic agreed. Then the trumpet tone changed, and Alexis stepped out of the carriage, radiant in the sun, and the gathered nobles gasped in awe at the sight. Dominic's sigh of appreciation wasn't missed by the techno which standing beside him, and Dominic realized why the wives exited second. The ranking guests were waiting to meet with the titled noble, but everyone else was waiting to see how fashionable the noble ladies were. So, while Dominic spoke with a small handful of people, the rest of the crowd only cared about Alexis. If he had actual business to settle, this arrangement not only gave him more time, but a chance to speak without being overheard over the noise of the crowd. Once the princess had made her way to him, Dominic extended his arm for her to take, then followed the herald through the halls to the throne room. Hundreds of nobles, nearly everyone of importance in the capital, lined the aisles, standing and waiting for their entrance. Flowers had been strewn along the red carpets by a pair of young noble daughters, and the throne room was fully decorated for a celebration. Dominic and Alexis paused as everyone else entered the room, and then the herald ushered them through the door and down the aisle toward the throne. Dominic noticed that the pattern of the carpet had a mark telling him where to stop, and the assistant behind the king was giving directions by hand signals. Stand, military salute, bow. Greet the king. Dominic placed his right hand over his heart, clenched into a fist, and then bowed to a 45-degree angle. Your Majesty, I have come at your call, Dominic announced, while Alexis curtsied. Father, I have returned, she finished. Welcome home, daughter. Lord Sorcerer Dominic Wavemates, today we have called you here to recognize your marriage to the 9th princess, Alexis Cygnus. The crown blesses this union, and wishes to reward you for your contributions to the war effort. Today, in the newly acquired territories of the Stantia province, I do declare that Lord Sorcerer Dominic Wavemates is elevated to the rank of Duke and the title Duke of Westover. The Duke is hereby granted a hereditary peerage of 12,000 acres, with a total ducal estate of 500 square kilometers, to include the lands of 20 barons to be named at a future date. For 2 years, the lands under Duke Westover will be exempted from royal taxes, as a reward for military service. Kneel now, and accept our blessing, the king declared. The few who hadn't already known that this was coming were in shock as Dominic took a knee, and the king placed his hands on both of Dominic's shoulders, before hanging a badge of office around his neck on a thick gold chain. Rise, Duke Westover. You have much to do. Dominic rose and bowed to the king, but remained silent, as the advisor beside the throne instructed. Normally, for a new noble, there would be an oath of fealty, Dominic knew. So, this was a statement by the king, that he recognized the Wavemates' lineage, and considered Dominic to be a born noble of Signia, now that the territory of his birth was under the dominion of the Signia crown. Dominic hadn't picked up on that right away, but his sensitive hearing caught all the whispered conversations among the upper nobility, and it didn't take long to grasp most of the nuance. An advisor came forward with a half-dozen scrolls on a tray, which Dominic took and placed in his storage cube. Then the king moved to Princess Alexis and pulled her into a hug. "Congratulations, daughter. I wish you all the joy in the world with your new husband." Then he moved back to his throne, and the advisor motioned for Dominic and Alexis to move to the left side of the aisle. "Will the Princess Josephine and Duke Saldoc of Bastaviria approach the throne?" the advisor announced. The two stepped from the crowd, with the handsome Duke looking smug, and the princess looking disgusted by his very existence. It had to be something personal between the two of them, Dominic assumed. The Duke was a young man, not yet 30. He was handsome, muscular, his hands faintly scarred from combat training, everything that should have been desirable to the princess. The crown would like to announce the betrothal of Princess Josephine to Duke Saldoc. Does anyone have a reason these two should not be wed? Speak now or forever hold your peace, the king asked. He was about to continue when a man stepped into the aisle. Thorvald, heir to Duke North of West Kyria, challenges Duke Saldoc for the right to the princess' hand in marriage. Thorvald declared, voice booming in the throne room. By what right? The Duke snarled as Thorvald swaggered toward him. The right of prior claim. I declare that my union with the princess is a love match, sealed with her first kiss, Thorvald declared. Both the Duke and Princess Josephine looked horribly offended, and the princess glared at him when Thorvald winked at her. The king cleared his throat. And when did this happen? Just now, Thorvald replied with a smirk, then pulled Josephine into a deep kiss. Either she was too shocked to respond, or she had actually been holding out for Thorvald, but she didn't attempt to push him away as the room fell silent at the pure audacity. Now, which one of them is going to murder him? Father or Josephine? Alexis whispered. Dominic was betting on the king. Josephine's blush as Thorvald broke the kiss said that she wasn't nearly as likely to kill him right now as her father was. Chapter 211. Big Brass. The room was silent for a few long seconds as the king slowly got to his feet. You impudent wretch! How dare you? The king's voice was soft, but deadly as he stalked down from the throne. However, Thorvald didn't back down. I have made my claim, and I meant every word of it. He insisted, all of the flamboyant buffoon persona stripped away as he squared his shoulders to uphold his tarnished honor. Duke Saldoc simply looked disgusted by the entire situation. The purity and chastity of a royal bride was generally unquestionable. If any such incident had happened in the past, she would have been forced to wed to avoid public shaming, but Thorvald had dared to do something so audacious in public. Once word got out, the king of Bastaviria wouldn't bless their union until Thorvald was dead. But for Duke Saldoc, this was nothing more than a political deal, sealing a trade alliance with Signia through the influence granted as a son-in-law. He had no particular interest in the princess herself, other than for her influence. But that didn't mean he was not enraged by Thorvald screwing everything up at the last second. We will resolve this in private. The three of you follow me. The rest of you are dismissed. Enjoy the festivities, the king declared, then dragged Thorvald out of the room by his ear, while the delinquent nobleman smiled at Princess Josephine, who slapped him across the face, then smiled back at him. Alexis grabbed Dominic by the hand and dragged him back down the hall to her suite, with her royal guard detachment falling in behind them. The second that the door was closed and latched, Alexis turned on Dominic. Goddess, can you believe it? Thorvald, of all people. Thorvald. Father is going to kill him, then order him resurrected so that he can kill him again. She gushed, waving her hands in excitement. That man had better bring healing potions to his own wedding. Dominic agreed. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation, and Colonel Wilkes stepped into the suite, along with the other 9 members of the Royal Guard. Your Highness, no gossiping without us, the colonel joked, then patted the princess on her armored shoulder. It's good to see you back home safely. What happened to the Natural Sons Regiment? He asked. The Crown Prince asked them to remain in Albroles. The city is informally under occupation, as the regiment is providing security to the palace during the transition. Viscount Boscombe is now King Gustav IX, but it is highly likely that there will be a civil war beginning within Dagos before the month is over. Prince Kaizen has been stirring up trouble, and he's got the majority of the northern lords behind him, Alexis explained. Colonel Wilkes nodded. That is understandable. We were instructed to ensure that you both knew that the king intends for you to depart in the morning again, headed for the estate he has granted you. We will accompany you this time, as we don't expect to come back to the palace until you are summoned again. I believe that there are maids gifted to you in your dowry as well, so be sure that we don't leave anyone behind when we go. They would be most distraught if they were left at the palace like an unwanted dress when you departed for the estate. Your marriage has been quite the topic of conversation lately, you know? Alexis chuckled. I would imagine so. With the rushed nature, and of course the circumstances, the gossip mongers must have been going wild. You have no idea. It will be good to get away from the palace for some time. Did you want to pick up anything before we leave? Or would you like to have it all shipped to you later? The staff will pack your clothing and personal effects. Colonel Wilkes asked. Is there a particular reason that we're being hurried out of the palace so quickly? Alexis asked, and the colonel froze, unsure if he should answer that. Your hesitation tells me that the answer is yes, so you might as well come out with it. She continued. The leader of her royal guard sighed, then nodded. Yes, there has been significant instability in the region where your new holdings are, but that's only a part of it. The king wants his children all out of the palace during the negotiations, as he believes that there will be another major attack on the capital. Now that you are married and have duties outside the palace, he has the perfect excuse to send you away. If it were up to him, there would not have been a stopover here at all, and the airship would have dropped you directly at Westover. However, there are many foreign royals and nobles present, so a formal recognition was needed to ensure that they couldn't pretend to be unaware of your marriage and title. So, the delicate princess is being sent away to keep her out of politics? Alexis asked sarcastically. Or so you don't stab anyone. Your sister already has on more than one occasion, and we are all aware that when the twins are together, the trouble multiplies. The colonel joked. There had to be more going on here than she was aware of. Many of the border barons in that portion of the country had been executed as traitors to the crown. The territory that they were given was essentially barren, abandoned for a decade, and now they were being rushed along out of the palace like unwanted visitors. Not like family, and certainly not like familiar faces who worked in the palace. Colonel Wilkes could tell that she wasn't convinced by his version of events, but he wasn't privy to all of the details behind the king's decisions, and with Princess Alexis away, his team only got news from the briefings secondhand from the other royal guards. They didn't deliberately keep secrets from the other royal guards, but it wasn't the same as having been there yourself. Chapter 212. Need to know type details. Ella, the lone female on Princess Alexis's royal guard detachment, moved up to smack the colonel on the head. You forgot to ask about the important things. First, we need to know, did you manage to avoid a major scandal without your maids? Second, is it true what they say about dragonkin and inhuman stamina? She demanded. Alexis rolled her eyes at the guard, then shrugged. It's really not hard to avoid scandal when you just behave as a traveling lower noble's wife. Even the Natural Sons Regiment didn't have any concerns about our arrangements after the first night. But how am I supposed to know the second part? Who am I supposed to compare it to? You, going through half of a city guard detachment in an evening. Ella frowned. You've got a point. Guard recruits are adorable, but they're terrible lovers. Perhaps we should get a few more of the boys married off, and then we can compare. Alexis chuckled. We can have some girls' time to catch up and compare notes later, but not in front of all these men. Let Duke Dominic brag to them if he must. The colonel raised a hand to stop that line of conversation. Thank you, but I don't need the personal details of your love life, Your Highness. The royal guards chuckled at the thought. It was good to see the princess happy, but they had still grown up with her, trained with her, learned the sword and joined the royal order with her. If anything, it would be more like hearing about their little sister's romantic exploits than anything they could congratulate Dominic on. Well, if we're being run out of the palace first thing in the morning, we should probably turn in early. Dominic, was there anything that you still needed to get before we go? Alexis asked. Dominic shook his head. Nothing that we're going to be able to get on short notice. As long as we are gifted with the basics to equip the manor, I should be able to take care of the rest. I have the spells to make copper roofing and fieldstone walls. Those will take care of most of the structural repairs. Then we can start recruiting residents the moment that we get settled in. Assuming that they don't attack us on sight, that is. Colonel Wilkes chuckled at the notion. I don't think that we will have as many problems as you're thinking. Not once they find out who you are. The real problems will be when everyone who is not a native commoner finds out who you are. There are still quite a few noblemen left over from the old Wavemates kingdom, the ones who defected to Dagos before or during the attack and didn't have any of the Dragonkin bloodline. They are not going to be pleased to find out that you're back, and that you outrank them. There are no surviving dukes in Stantia province, other than yourself. So, you will be the highest-ranking nobleman in the region, and the most logical point of contact with the king, as Princess Alexis is there with you, but it would be inappropriate for the men to approach her directly. So, not only do we have to build a ducal estate from nothing, we have to do it before the other nobles start showing up. I should have known that there was a catch. Alright, I can work with that. A bit of magitech and some visual improvements will get us started well enough to put on appearances. I just hope that the manor house isn't in too terrible of shape. Dominic replied with a sigh. Apparently it's quite well preserved. The unit that was stationed there during the later parts of the war did some cleaning while they were in the area. The real issue will be finding domestic staff before the first visitors arrive. I would suggest stopping along the way to find them so that we arrive with all the household personnel that we need. Colonel Wilkes suggested. Princess Alexis nodded. We have to pass through Skypington, Darden and Castle City on our way. One of those three is bound to have what we need. There are always domestic servants out of work, or those looking to become one. Colonel Wilkes hummed in interest. How did Wavemates do it before? I never had a reason to study the topic. Dominic shrugged. The same as Signia. Noble servant positions are somewhat hereditary, in that the one holding the position is responsible for choosing and training their replacement if they work to retirement. The head maid would choose the replacements for new hires, as most of the ladies would only work a few years before returning home to marry with their savings as a dowry. But the head maid herself, if she chose to marry and stay on, plus most of the outside staff, would just raise their own children for their positions. It really is much easier that way. The colonel frowned. So, you're saying that there might not be many qualified servants along the way, only the rejects? Dominic shook his head. No, there will be plenty of qualified staff candidates. Many will compete for the best positions, and only one can get them in every estate. So, there will be maids who did their best to become head maid and failed, cooks who were replaced when they lost the position of head chef for an estate, and many others. The most savvy will be employed already, but there is always hope to find a few qualified people within any city you visit. Colonel Wilkes nodded. That makes sense. My family home has only ever had 4 staff members, and we hire a gardener to come in. But I spent most of my life here in the palace, where servants regularly come and go. The employee turnover rate was mostly because they kept getting pregnant and needing to leave to start their family, but that was an entirely different matter. In the capital, it wasn't hard to find more staff. But in a smaller town, it was more likely that the local lord would either be the father of the maid's child, or willing to let them come back to work and place the child with a nursemaid or nanny. Chapter 213. Staffing Choices. Dominic brought out the plan for the domestic staff they would need at the manor, the one that he had made for the courtship trials, and showed it to the royal guard. These are what we will eventually need, but there are only a few that will be needed immediately. The head maid, the scullery maids, the cook, and the groom or farrier for the horses. Unless we're going to be taking a whole set of mechanical horses to the estate, we will definitely need someone to work with the horses. That is probably someone that we should try to find in the capital, though. Unfortunately, we only have 1 night's time to search. That does not make it easy to find a qualified person, he explained. Colonel Wilkes patted him on the shoulder. Fear not. I can find you a qualified cook and a farrier tonight, who will be ready to go in the morning. Alexis gave him a dubious look, and the guard shrugged. I may have been sleeping with that girl Jasmine from the farrier's forge. Plus, you know that Cook Beth has always had a soft spot for you. If we ask her to come along, she will certainly resign her spot in the kitchens to join the duchy as its head chef. Alexis smiled. Beth had been passed over for a kitchen management position every year for the last 15 years, but she had stayed in the kitchen, working the royal wing faithfully anyhow. Most chefs would have left the second or third time they were passed over like that. But she still made the twin princesses' favorite snacks every day, just in case they wanted some. All right, I will write up an invitation letter to show their managers so that they're not marked as having quit without a guarantee of new work by their managers. It won't be the first time a noble house stole away good staff, and it won't be the last. Alexis agreed. A few moments later, Wilkes left with the letters of employment, and a maid who had been at the door entered. "Your Highness, I have the caravan contents list for you," she explained. The princess' eyebrows lifted with every line. Was she starting a new estate, or relocating her own? There were the expected dried provisions, a full set of kitchenware, of the sort that a military camp kitchen would have for feeding a regiment, then multiple beds, carpets, tables, chairs, even books. Not as many books as she would have hoped, but they were noted as a wedding gift from the local publishing houses. Then there was dishware, silverware, crystal glasses, and all of the sorts of domestic gifts that would be expected at the wedding of a lower noble, who would also have to start his own estate from scratch. "It appears that the nobles of Signia have taken good care of us," Dominic noted. "They even donated all 3 trucks that it will take to move the goods. Those will be very useful in the future." Alexis agreed. 3 Magitech-powered steam trucks were a huge gift, even from a ranking noble to a princess. So, they might have come from a group, or have been arranged by the king's assistants using coin gifts sent by nobles who were unable to attend the capital for the wedding. A wedding that never happened in the capital. But it was still the appropriate place to send the gifts, given the circumstances. "Well, it looks like we don't need to do any housewares shopping. We've got everything that we should need to get started in the manor," Dominic noted as he finished reading the list and comparing it to what they had come up with for the marriage trial. It was possible that the results of the trials had been used as a wedding registry so that the princess would have all that she needed when she departed with her new husband. That would have let the nobles pick the gifts long before the final decision was made, and they would have been suitable for any of the grooms. "We should rest early. Here is some coin for the new hires so they can get what they need to leave in the morning. Tell them that we will provide everything that they need, in case they're leaving with nothing but a change of clothes," Alexis instructed. "We will send in the ladies' maids," one of the guards agreed. Dominic winked at him. "Don't worry about it. I can draw the bath and get the princess ready for bed." The royal guard chuckled. "I will ensure that the soundproofing is active. Don't forget to close the door." Alexis rolled her eyes. "They already filled the bath and set it to warm. But you are not keeping me up all night when we've got a long day ahead." Dominic made a kissing face at her, but the princess just laughed as she went to bathe. "Well, a man can try," he whispered to the guards with a shrug. "You're a brave man. You do remember that you're going to be sleeping beside her, right?" Ella, the lone woman in the Princess Royal Guard team, asked. "Don't worry. If there are serious injuries, I'm sure that I can convince her to heal me." Dominic went to the ensuite to shower and change for bed, then waited for Alexis to be ready. It didn't take long for the princess to arrive with her hair in a loose braid and still damp from the bath. Dominic stepped up behind her and slid the dressing gown off her shoulder, then kissed his way up her neck, from the collarbone to the earlobe. "You're not playing fair," Alexis complained. "That is true, but I only promised that I would let you sleep at a reasonable hour, not that I would keep my hands to myself." The princess giggled, then turned and pushed him backward onto the bed. "Well, if that is the case, I suppose it wouldn't hurt to delay for just a little bit longer." Chapter 214. Hurried departure again. The next morning was a chaotic rush to get showered and dressed in time to get everything organized for their departure. The Royal Guard would be driving the trucks, and the colonel had managed to find 3 staff members to go with them: Cook Beth, Jasmine, the farrier, and a scullery maid named Liz. She was an indentured servant to the palace, as the king had paid her family's debts and she still had years of wages left to pay them off. But the colonel had arranged to pay the exchequer and transfer her debts to Dominic, as Duke of Westover. It was a common enough thing, though most of the people who were working off a debt were working off fines for petty crimes, not their family's massive gambling debts as Liz was. Beth had recommended her, as even now, her family was pressuring her to give them the portion of her wages which didn't go to paying the debts they had accrued. Being away from the capital would be good for her. That was enough to get the household started, though the princess still intended to have them stop along the way and pick up a few more cleaning staff. Once she had staff that she could trust, she would promote a few of them to ladies' maids. Additional cleaning staff were certain to be essential to the first weeks, though. If the house had been full of soldiers, it was certain to be a mess, even if it was in serviceable condition. When they exited the royal quarters of the palace, it was time to say their goodbyes. But Dominic couldn't find Pops in his suite, despite the early hour. His next stop was the forge, but when Dominic stepped outside, the old dwarf was sitting on the step of one of the trucks, smoking his pipe. "Ah, there you are. Pops, it's been a pleasure working as your apprentice," Dominic began. Pops snorted. "Did you think it was that easy to get rid of me? I've leased the forge at the staging area to my nephew Corbin, and my gear is packed. They might have forced me to work at the palace for the war, but it's about over now. No harm in leaving for greener pastures." Dominic smiled. "We might need another truck if you're packing all your gear." Pops chuckled and tapped the ash out of his pipe. "I sold most of it to the boy. He will need it. But he's a proper master smith as well. The staging area won't be hurt by his presence. And the master armorer has agreed to take over the royal forge. Master gunsmith Jacob will be taking over as the weapons master in my place." Dominic nodded. "It's an honor to have you with us, then. Perhaps the new estate won't struggle too much to get the farmers set up. I don't think that the kingdom has a better toolmaker." From behind him, Dominic heard a young woman laugh. "Not only are you stealing my big sister, you're stealing my favorite cook and the master smith as well? You have made out like a bandit, Duke Westover," Princess Eleanor joked. Dominic bowed politely to the youngest princess. "So it would seem. Perhaps now that the war is ending, they will let you rejoin your friends in the academy. Even schoolwork has to be better than being stuck in the palace all the time." Princess Eleanor huffed. "Anything is better than being confined to the palace. I'm not even allowed out into the noble districts to visit friends or go shopping. I will be so happy when that restriction is over. But not having my big sisters around will be awful. You're stealing one, and Josephine might be going to West Kyria with Thorvald. I don't know what happened in the meeting yet, but Duke Saldoc looked enraged when he left." One of her guards cleared his throat and the princess sighed. "My governess says that gossip is an unsuitable pastime for a noble lady." Dominic nodded. "Perhaps a popular one, but hardly seemly, I suppose. Princess Alexis will be here soon, though. If you want to send her off, just wait a little longer." The youngest princess sighed, then went to join Pops on the step of the truck. "Forge master, might I join you? I suspect that my sister will need some time to say her goodbyes. With a lifetime of acquaintances in the palace, she has far more people to meet this morning than Duke Westover." She smirked a little as she used Dominic's title, and Pops patted her on the head. "Things are changing, are they not? To think that when you first met, he was an apprentice smith, out hunting goblins for forge materials." The old dwarf joked. "I wish I could go out hunting goblins again. Do you know how far behind my training is now that I'm not free to upgrade my trade skill? How am I supposed to reach rank 5 paladin if I can't go out and fight anything?" She complained. "Well, you can always keep practicing with the royal guard. Isn't that how the rest of the royal family had to do it when they weren't sneaking out of the city?" Pops asked. Eleanor sighed heavily, doing her best to look the part of the mistreated princess locked in a castle. "They used up all the good ways to sneak out. Now that I'm trying, the guards have seen all the tricks and there is nothing new to them. I bet that my first and second brothers had it so easy." The royal guards chuckled at her annoyance. "Highness, the first and second princes had to grow up with the guards who were familiar with the previous generation's attempts to sneak out of the palace. So they were in the same position that you are. The head of her guard detachment explained. Well, that makes me feel a little better. But where is Alexis? They're going to come drag me back to lessons soon, and she's still not here. From the palace, the sound of armored boots marked the approach of someone important, and the youngest princess stood up with a hopeful smile on her face. But the one who arrived was not Alexis, but Josephine, accompanied by Lord Thorvald and her royal guards. Is Alexis not here yet? She must be at the barracks saying goodbye to the order. I should have gone there first, the older twin announced with an annoyed frown. Apparently, everyone was waiting in the wrong spot today. Chapter 215. Smooth Departure. When Alexis did finally show up, it looked like she had half the paladin order with her. We should have known that you were stopping for one last drink with the paladins, little sister. Josephine laughed. Alexis rolled her eyes. It was barely dawn. She hadn't been drinking with them, just saying goodbye. Plus, she was only younger by half an hour. Is everything ready? It looks like everyone has come out to say goodbye. Alexis noted. Pops will be joining us at the estate. He has resigned his royal commission as forge master. But yes, everything is ready to go as soon as you are. Dominic agreed. Well, we've got nearly 3 days' worth of travel, even if the weather holds, so we might as well get a move on. I am certain that we will return before too long. After all, it's custom for all royals to return at least once a year, unless they're out of the country. Alexis agreed. Josephine pulled her into a hug, then whispered in her ear. Thorvald's insane tactic worked. Father changed the marriage arrangement. That made Alexis giggle. Keep him close. He's kind of dumb, in an adorable way. Alexis agreed. That made the royal guards laugh. Everyone took Thorvald as a somewhat lovable buffoon, with a penchant for letting his mouth get him in trouble. Josephine knew better, but she still agreed with Alexis. He was the adorable sort of dumb. With one final round of well wishes, Alexis' royal guards loaded into the trucks, and they began making their way out of the palace for a very long cross-country journey. Until the old castle city, they would have good upgraded roads to drive on, so they would make pretty good time. But after that, it was just country dirt roads between villages. They were far from straight, usually muddy and soft, and never suited to high-speed travel. Nobody cast the convoy a second glance as they left the city, as nobody recognized the emblem that had been created for the Duke of Westover. It was clear that it was an important position by the level of decoration, but nobody knew it. They didn't have the royal emblems for the princess on the carriages, and a random convoy of nobles and gear was so common these days it wasn't even worth noticing. All day long, open fields, small towns and forests passed outside the windows as the convoy trundled down the stone road. There was very little traffic on the road, and what they did find was mostly farm wagons, who simply moved off the road rather than risking a confrontation with a noble who might unreasonably declare that they were in the way and insulting his position. Our stop for the night will be Skypington. Normally, we would go through the night, but we thought that it might be better to try to get a few final supplies that weren't available in the capital. Colonel Wilkes, who was driving their truck for the evening shift, explained. Princess Alexis nodded. That sounds good to me. I'm sure that everyone could use a good rest if you can find a proper inn to park at, where we can keep guard on the caravan. If not, we can set camp outside the city and send someone in tomorrow morning to get supplies. The colonel looked out at the fading light and sighed. I think that we will be setting up outside the city tonight. By the time that we get there, it will be long past dark, and I don't want to hunt for somewhere with space when we've got a fully loaded caravan. Long past dark was an understatement. By the time that they stopped at Skypington, it was nearly midnight. They had made good time thanks to the relatively light loads in the trucks, but it was a long trip, and the road had been in worse condition than expected. With so much else going on, nobody had done any maintenance after the spring floods, or during the summer rains. The Royal Guard set up camp for everyone, including the large round tent usually reserved for senior officers and traveling upper nobles. They had the process down to an art form, and the camp was set up within half an hour, but most of their passengers didn't need anything. The 3 ladies and Pops were all asleep along the benches of the carriage, so Dominic didn't bother to wake them. He just moved the sleeping form of Alexis to the tent with him and set a barrier over their bed for secure rest. If someone was looking to attack them, there would be no reason to look any further if they found the princess and Dominic in the tent as expected, and that would help keep everyone else safe. But nothing was coming to bother them in the dead of the night, and Dominic woke to the smell of oatmeal and cinnamon as the royal guard made breakfast, with the help of Beth, their new cook. "Give it just a few minutes and I will have biscuits. I mixed them up first thing, and they are baking over the fire," she explained as Dominic came out of the tent to check on the situation. Liz rushed into the tent, and Dominic cast her a curious look, then realized that she was taking on the role of lady's maid to Alexis, as the ones she had at the palace had been palace staff, not her own. That seemed odd to Dominic, but Alexis surely had a reason that she hadn't kept a trusted retainer or two with her in the palace. Unless the only ones she trusted were her royal guard. Biscuits didn't take long to bake, and Beth had made them in a huge square cast-iron pan with a thick lid that had coals from the evening's fire stacked on top. Dominic assumed that was to help with even baking, and it certainly worked as the entire tray of biscuits came out perfectly. A rare skill when cooking over a campfire. "Who are we sending in for supplies? I have a short list of things that will make life easier. I don't think that we should grab new staff yet. Once we are within 100 kilometers of the estate, start looking for unwed daughters, widows and others who need the work. It will make my kitchen run much more smoothly if we don't have to deal with the resentment of locals versus outsiders," Beth suggested. The woman had been working a kitchen longer than anyone else in the group, excluding Pops, had been alive. Not arguing with her was definitely the best way to get the kitchen working at maximum efficiency. Chapter 216, Travel Day. "I will take the list into town," one of the guards insisted, and two others stood to join him. "Be back in 2 hours. If you can't get what we need before then, we will get it at one of the other cities," Alexis instructed. "Of course, Your Highness. All of these things are domestic wares. If we were in the capital, we would go to Pops to order them, so there should be someone who has them in stock," he replied. Pops chuckled around a spoonful of oatmeal. "The lad has a point. I can make most of those items myself once we arrive. But if the cook wants them right away, just go buy them. I will make new ones that fit the kitchen properly once we know how much space she has to work with," Pops instructed. The matronly cook smiled as she realized that they had a willing master smith with them to help with the essentials. The camp was quickly packed, and the trio of guardsmen who went into the city came back much faster than expected, which Dominic mistook as a good sign at first. "Don't bother. The whole city is overrun with refugees. There is no stock of anything anywhere, and you can hardly walk in the streets. We might as well move on if we're not looking to take in some waifs to run the manor," the guard who had volunteered for the trip explained. "We've got 2 major cities left to move through today. Do you think that they will be better or worse?" Alexis asked. Castle City was under attack, so it's likely to be where many of these refugees came from. But if they made it this far, then Darden is likely so overrun with refugees that they're turning people away," Colonel Wilkes guessed. "In that case, these are either the troublemakers who were run out of Darden, or the motivated who are making their way to better chances of work. I know that you wanted locals for the kitchen, Beth, but we could grab a few domestic staff for cleaning here," Alexis decided. The cook bowed in acceptance, and Dominic stood up from the folding camp stool. "All right, why don't I take Pops, and we will go look for maids? Or did you want to come and choose them in person?" he asked. "Take Liz with you. She will have a better eye for which candidates are likely to try to cause drama or sneak into beds not their own." Dominic nodded, and waited for Pops to rinse off his plate so that he could join them. "I will keep my eye out for a few skilled craftsmen as well. They're harder to come by, but they might be among the refugees. If we can recruit them here, it will be much easier than after we're settled. Maids and laborers you can find anywhere. Hell, you can buy debt contracts in any major city. But skilled tradesmen are another thing, and we're going to need carpenters to rebuild the village, even with the magic Dominic has," the old dwarf explained. "All right, we can make space for a half dozen or more. Get who you need. You've read the budget that we're working with. It's the same one Dominic wrote for the king's trials. Alexis agreed. Dominic nodded and led the way to the city. The presence of the three of them, even though none of them were dressed in a particularly flashy way, was enough to draw the immediate attention of hundreds of refugees. Some wanting to get an update on the events of the war, others desperate for some way out of the refugee camps that had taken over the slums. Dominic noticed a group of women in household servant outfits, somewhat worn, but clean. But when he looked at Liz, she shook her head. "Those are not servants," she whispered. "I might not be the most worldly man, but they didn't look like prostitutes to me." Dominic replied, which made both Pops and Liz laugh. Liz smirked as she replied, "Oh, they'd slap you for even suggesting that. Those are all noble daughters. Either they lost their family, were run off by their husbands, or fled when their family turned traitor. It's the only way that they would have escaped being executed along with the rest of their household. But while they might look like they want work, what they really want is to climb back up the social ladder. If you took even one in, you would never have a day of peace in your household again." Pops nodded. "If you want to keep your wife happy, pick cleaners too old to be looking for a husband, but too young for their bodies to be complaining about the work. And pick the ugly ones. The ugly ones are always less trouble with the Lord, but more trouble with the guards and stable hands." Liz giggled and shrugged. "I won't deny that. The fewer teeth they have, the more likely you are to find them in the stables when they're late for work." Then Pops stepped aside and grabbed something that was hidden behind a wooden shipping pallet. It turned out to be a woman in her mid-30s, with a veil over her face and a patched coat over a simple dress. Definitely a farm wife, Dominic decided. He would recognize that particularly muscular build anywhere. You didn't get that cleaning a manor, you got that build tossing hay and carrying sacks of grain. "Woman, are you looking for work?" "My lord is looking for reliable staff for the manor and yard," the old dwarf demanded in a gruff tone. The woman gave him an assessing look, then spat at his feet and nodded. "I won't object to working a nobleman's garden, so long as he's not a handsy sort." She agreed. Liz smiled at Dominic. "I like this one. Then we've found ourselves a gardener. Now we just need a few reliable cleaners." Dominic agreed. The woman looked Dominic up and down, then paused at his horns. "A dragonkin lord?" she asked. "The new Duke of Westover." Dominic agreed. He could see that she was calculating how far that was from where she started by the way that she drew a mental map in the air before she nodded in satisfaction. Whether it was close enough or far enough from where she had started, he did not know. But it didn't change her mind. Chapter 217, Debt Contracts. "If you want reliable maids, hit the slave market," the ragged woman suggested. "Pardon?" Dominic asked. "Ah, the debt contract sales, Your Grace. You see, most of the refugees here have nothing but hungry families and outstanding debts. Every day, they hold sales, looking to raise funding in exchange for a worker's debt contract. Now, most of the buyers aren't some noble lord looking for honest employees, if you catch my meaning. And with no real work, how long do you think it will take to pay off that debt?" she asked. Dominic nodded. "I will send a message to the capital. They will have to take action before it gets too out of hand. But what is your name? And do you have family here we will need to bring?" "I am Tenna, a widow from Kilksea Lake. My children are already grown and scattered to the winds," she replied. "All right, lead the way, and you can help Pops and Liz pick out a few who look like they won't cause drama. My wife is not forgiving of flirts, so don't pick anyone whose blood we will have to wash out of the carpets the first week," Dominic warned. Tenna led them through the crowded streets past the market where the men must have gotten their supplies last night. There was a little bit of everything available, but the city was short on two essential factors: food and shelter. Tenna stopped at a large auction market, which was still set up for selling livestock, complete with straw on the ground. But instead of livestock, there were defeated-looking refugees with signs gathered around the edge. Each had a currency amount on it, and some had information about work skills on them. Pops nodded when he found a middle-aged man with a slightly hunched back and thickly calloused hands. He was sitting on a toolbox, so he hadn't lost everything yet. But he was definitely desperate. His sign said he was a carpenter and was looking for 500 silver coins. That was a lot of money, years' worth of wages for a working man, and Dominic wondered what sort of trouble the man had gotten himself into. "Carpenter, is it? What's your story?" "A gambler?" Dominic asked. The man shook his head. "I served with Baron Khalid's militia, but the barony was overrun by the time that we got home. My wife and daughters are here in town, working under debt contracts. I need the whole 500 to buy them back." Dominic considered whether it would be worth it to bring this man's whole family with them. The price was high, but if the rest of the family was worth it, they might get reliable workers out of it. "Let's go see the debt holder for your family. I might be able to work something out." Dominic agreed. The carpenter led them to a large building, and Dominic inwardly smiled. The debt holder was the Merchants' Guild. "Welcome, sir. I'm sorry, but your subordinate is prohibited from this establishment. We can help you if he waits outside." The security guard greeted Dominic. "Welcome, Lord Wavemates." His hand gestures said, "I understand. Many become emotional when they are in a tight position. I will ask him to wait at the door and not cause a scene." Dominic replied, "I want to hire the carpenter, but he wishes to buy out his family's contracts as a requirement to come to Westover." Dominic signed back, "We should speak in private." The guard agreed, then gestured for a manager to come over and meet them. Pops placed a hand on the carpenter's shoulder, stopping him from coming in and making a scene. Liz followed silently as Dominic left the room, while the others waited outside. Nothing was said until they were in a private room, and then the manager turned and bowed to Dominic. "I hear that you have earned yourself a new title, my lord. Congratulations on your wedding." The manager began, then took a seat on one of the comfortable sofas and began to pour rum into a pair of tumblers. "News travels fast, though it would seem that I have been gaining titles left and right lately. Did you know that the Dagos nobles have their own for me?" The Merchant Guild manager smiled. "The Butcher of Westover. Ironic, considering that you are now also the Duke of Westover. Are you actually intending to live there, or just establish a household? If that's the case, I can recommend a castellan to do the day-to-day management. They are a guild member, but can be trusted to be loyal to a Wavemates noble." Dominic nodded. "I may take you up on that, but I have a more urgent need for a skilled carpenter, and I believe the one I found should have the skills." The manager nodded. "He has the skills. Not the attitude, though. How did the debt get that large? Even if he had a whole family of beauties for the brothel, 500 coins is a lot." Dominic signed as the manager spoke. "It's 100 plus penalties and damage to the property. If you agree to take the whole family away and never let them return, I will waive the penalties." Dominic sighed. Troublesome workers are never truly desirable. But the whole village needs rebuilding, and that's a lot of carpentry to keep him out of trouble. "Tell me about the family." "The castellan that I have in mind has been with the guild for 30 years as an accountant. He was once a branch manager, but chose to step back during a power struggle." The manager replied, "As you guessed, a wife and 4 beautiful daughters. They ruined their faces before they arrived here, but the servers in the executive lounge wear veils. None will be a blushing virgin bride, but we didn't sell them to a brothel." Dominic nodded. "If he's available, I would like to meet him, even though I will be in residence at the manor, so having someone to do all the math for me will save many headaches. I trust that if he wasn't an honest accountant, he would be a dead accountant by now. The Merchant Guild might not be a crime syndicate, but they weren't known to tolerate traitors or thieves." Chapter 218. Castellan Julio. The manager motioned to someone at the door, and a moment later, a whip-thin man in his later middle years with silver hair at his temples and sideways slitted eyes that spoke of non-human heritage entered. "Manager, how may I be of assistance?" he asked. "Julio, Duke Westover is looking for a castellan, and I thought that it might be a good opportunity for you." The manager's hands said the exact same thing, confirming that it wasn't a trick. The accountant smiled as he noticed Dominic, then bowed politely. "I have heard much about you, my lord. Will this be a long-term request? Or a transitional position during the rebuilding? He asked. Long-term, Dominic agreed, with the chance to make the role hereditary if you have a trained heir. The accountant nodded. I would be honored to join you. Are you taking that mad carpenter's family? The wife is broken, her mind is about gone. Does the guild have a work contract on hand? I like to put everything in writing. Dominic agreed. He can deal with her issues when they arrive. The carpenter isn't house staff, just as long as the daughters aren't trouble. As they were silently speaking, the women in question were brought into the room with veils covering their faces, but Dominic had no problem determining which was the mother. Her posture was off, as if she was staring into space, and while her eyes had thin cloth over them, he could still see the age wrinkles around them that the others lacked. The manager cleared his throat. Ladies, the Duke of Westover has purchased your debt contracts today. You will work for him until your debts are paid. However, the Duke is a kind man, and he has agreed to hire your father as a skilled tradesman. That should greatly reduce the time needed to pay your debts. Greet your new employer, and gather your belongings. Thank you, my lord. We are grateful for your consideration. Did our father find you? One of the girls asked. Dominic nodded. He was at the auction looking for funding. He had skills that my household needed, so I will be taking you in as cleaners. Your father may pay off your mother's debts on her behalf. The girls curtsied, and Liz shot Dominic an annoyed glance. What was the point of bringing her if she wasn't even going to get to vet the ladies? Liz, go with them, and help them carry their goods. Dominic instructed. She could talk to them privately, and Dominic would find a new role for them if they weren't suitable. The Merchant Guild's assistant brought out a work contract, and Dominic carefully read it over, then filled in the offered wage, as he remembered it from their budgeting session. Then he passed it to Julio, who read through it, then signed at the bottom. I will pack my goods for the next few weeks, and arrange for the rest of my belongings to be sent along with the next guild convoy. Julio announced, then extended his hand to shake Dominic's. That works for me. We will be renovating everything, so it's better to not have too much to unpack the day we arrive. Dominic agreed. I understand, Your Grace. I don't have too many essential items, but I do have a few heirloom pieces that won't be convenient to transport today. Julio explained. Liz returned a few minutes later with the rest of their new hires, and a determined look on her face. She nodded in approval at Dominic, and her position said that she was feeling protective of the new maids. That should be a good sign, Dominic thought. If the scullery maid and the cleaning maids got along, they could all work together. Initially, he had hoped that the mother might be an option for their first head maid, but she still looked like she was lost in her own little world. Dominic took out a level 5 uncommon grade mana revolver, made with the clay-to-steel process, and placed it on the table next to the tea set. Does this cover the debts and the referral fee for Julio? Dominic asked. The manager smiled. And then some. It will also cover the shipment of his remaining belongings. I know what he needs sent to him. They had gathered more people than they had come for, Dominic realized as he led the procession through the city. They hadn't intended to get more than 6 people, due to the space that they had remaining in the carriages, but he had ended up with 8 in total. That was definitely a mistake on his part, but one day of cramped quarters or riding with the luggage was a burden that wouldn't cause any lasting harm. You know that you're going to catch hell when we get back, right? Pops asked as they left the main city and entered the scattered tents of the outer refugee camp. Perhaps I can sell it as looking for a reason to have her sit in my lap for the rest of the trip instead of me being bad at math? Dominic suggested. Alexis didn't speak at first when they arrived back at camp. She just stared at Dominic, waiting for him to explain. You see, it happened like this. Dominic began. We met Tenna, and she had all the qualifications we needed for a gardener, both for the food gardens and the decorative. Then we were looking for more workers, and we came across John, who is an experienced carpenter. Just what we needed to rebuild the houses around the manor. But John's family was under debt contract to the Merchants Guild. So, to recruit him, I bought out their contracts. Then, the manager suggested Julio here, who is one of their own accountants looking for a promotion. If he works out, he should be suitable as the new castellan. Alexis sighed. I should have known something like this would happen. It looks like it will be a crowded trip. One of the royal guards cleared his throat. If the lovely ladies need a lap to sit on, I don't mind volunteering. John's daughters all backed away, and the guard was promptly smacked on the head by both Colonel Wilkes and Ella at the same time. Serves you right. You don't even know how old they are. Alexis snorted. The guard shrugged. Milady, I don't reckon it matters. I'm riding with Wilkes, and he wouldn't let me get away with anything anyhow. Chapter 219. Meet the Maids. John shook his head in dismay. The royal guards would be a going concern around his daughters. However, John did not yet know what his family had done to keep the men away from them before he had caught up to them. They were already in the service of the Merchants' Guild when he arrived, and he had made the mistake of causing a scene on the first day he was in town. At which point, the guild refused to let him pay off their contracts unless he paid double. Things only went downhill from there. So, he was unaware that his daughters had all scarred their faces to scare away the men before they were transferred to the VIP lounge area, where they could keep a veil on without anyone asking questions. Tenna set her thick arms over the shoulders of the four younger women. If you're that desperate for a woman, why not try with me instead of bothering these young ladies? She asked. The guard emphatically shook his head. Madam Tenna, I'm just a young whelp. I can't handle that much woman. Pops might have the endurance of the forge, but us mere mortals aren't so well conditioned. That made the widow laugh and shake her head. Just keep your hands off the new hires until they're used to guardsmen and their perverted antics. We can't have you scaring them off before we get to the manor. Then Beth, the cook, stepped between them. How about this? Tenna and I will take the center seat in the front of two of the trucks, so we don't need anyone sitting in laps. That will give the indoor staff time to get to know each other and the Lord. The gardener doesn't have anything to do until we see what condition the house is in. Anyhow, everyone got into the trucks, and Dominic shook his head in dismay as he realized that all the maids had gathered at the front of the compartment, as far as humanly possible from where Dominic would be sitting. There are refreshments in the chest sitting in the middle of the floor, but that won't matter until lunch, unless you haven't had breakfast yet. Make yourself comfortable. It's at least a full day still until we are at the manor. Dominic instructed as he entered and closed the door behind him. The trucks set off down the road, intending to make it past Darden and Castle City before camping for the night. Alexis assessed Dominic's choices for staff. The carpenter looked capable, and his toolkit had been mostly complete, without any essential tools sold off. The accountant had a golden token from the Merchant Guild around his neck, marking a decade of trusted service around their assets. That was enough of a resume and referral to get him a job in any noble house. But there was something wrong with the oldest of the women. John, why don't you introduce us? She suggested. Of course, lady. I'm sorry. I forgot what estate we are going to. John replied. You were hired by Dominic, the Duke Westover, formerly Dominic Wavemates, which makes me the Duchess Westover, but also the 9th Princess Alexis Cygnus. She replied. John panicked, then nearly fell out of his seat as he bowed to the princess. Your Highness, forgive me. I did not know. I suspect that the Duke did not wish to speak your name within the city to avoid encouraging ambushers along the way. He stammered. Alexis motioned for him to sit upright. How about you introduce me to your family, as they seem reluctant to speak? John had noticed that as well. They hadn't said a word since they had left the Merchants' Guild. This is my wife, Wendy, John began, then whispered, Darling, aren't you going to greet our employers? Wendy silently bowed, and John looked concerned. One of his daughters leaned over to whisper in his ear, and the carpenter silently began to cry. Perhaps we will hold off on the introductions. Some things are better done in a less crowded setting. Alexis consoled him. One of the girls bowed politely, then spoke up. Your Highness, I think it would be better if we started over completely. The last few months have not been ones we would wish to remember. She suggested. Alexis nodded. In that case, I will arrange new identities for you when we arrive at the manor. The Westover Manor is freshly reinstated and has been vacant for some time. So we will be rebuilding everything, including the farmhouses and the village. You are the first staff hired for the house, but there will be more coming. Were any of you hoping to marry soon? If you are, I can reassign you to ladies' maids when we have a full complement of staff. The position rotates fairly frequently, as the prospective ladies are married off. The new hire hesitated, then lifted her veil, showing jagged scars across her cheeks and her nose. They had clearly been inflicted with a dull tool and left to heal improperly without treatment. That could actually be treated fairly easily with any of the royal guard's healing magic. But to the average lower noble or common man, the sight would be shocking. Alexis chuckles. I take that as a no, but you should catch your... Too late, he's out. The girl covered her face in embarrassment, then panicked, flailed her hands for a second, and then picked her unconscious father up off the floor. Nobody had thought to mention their injuries to him. However, it gave Alexis a great idea. Why shouldn't she teach them to fight instead? Once upon a time, Signia royalty had a veiled guard. Women who never showed their face in public and guarded the royal ladies. A few more trained guards around the house was never a bad thing, and embedding them among the staff would make security much quicker to respond to issues. If the ladies showed some talent at combat, she would have the guards start to train them and then obtain some trade skill cores for them. Chapter 220. All-Nighter. It took nearly 10 minutes before John was coherent again, and then another 2 hours before he was in any state to speak. The pain of the day's revelations was palpable in the carriage, and everyone else tactfully left them to their grief. An agony mixed with relief at their reunion. So, the ride was a silent one, until the sun started to go down, and the driver opened the window to the passenger compartment, startling the maids. Your Highness, should we continue through the night? If you look outside, you will see that there are refugee camps everywhere, and the farmers have set up a militia to keep their crops from being looted. The situation here on the outskirts of Castle City is far from good, and the rural villages appear to have been mostly demolished by the Dago's army on their way through. The driver asked. Alexis nodded. Just keep everyone moving through the night. The road gets bad north of here, but the trucks have good lights, we should be able to make it well enough. The driver nodded and closed the window, letting them rest as the sun went down. A few hours later, the drivers stopped to swap positions and to give everyone a rest break. It was fully dark, and they were in a more remote area, without any sign of farmhouses in sight. If they were going to stop overnight, this wouldn't be a bad spot for it, but Dominic got the feeling that they might have someone watching them from the dark. In the dark, not much would keep up with the trucks, as horses would struggle on the dirt road. But if they stayed stationary too long, then they would still be a target for vagrants and thieves sleeping near the road. Half an hour later, they were moving again, and Dominic wrapped his arm around Alexis to keep her upright as she slept against his side. Dawn broke with the trucks still moving, and another rest stop, where Beth quickly assembled a quick breakfast of biscuits, jam, and coffee. My apologies, but we are almost to the manor, according to the drivers. I will unpack the kitchen supplies the moment that we arrive and get started on a proper luncheon, she explained. Dominic smiled at the flustered cook. It's no problem. Traveling hard is called that because it comes with hardships, even if they are as small as biscuits for breakfast. At least they're not hardtack. Pops nodded emphatically. Even dunked in the coffee, hardtack is a miserable breakfast. We've all got plenty of work coming this afternoon. Just before noon, the road passed through a forested area, and Dominic pulled the window covering open. Do you need a moment? Alexis whispered as Dominic stared blankly out the window. Dominic shook his head. No, I will go check the area later. Let's start on the manor. If it hasn't been properly cleared, it will be the worst of it all. I just hope that the soldiers who had been stationed here treated the remains properly. The new hires assumed that he meant there had been a battle here during the most recent hostilities, but Pops and Alexis both knew that he was thinking of what happened here 10 years ago. Dominic hadn't buried the bodies before he left, and nobody had occupied the area since, other than one group of Signia soldiers a month ago. The truck stopped in the overgrown courtyard in front of the ramp entrance to the house, and everyone waited for Dominic to exit the truck, so he could be the first to see what was there without interference. Cautiously, Dominic stepped out of the truck and looked around the entrance. All signs of what had happened here a decade ago were gone, and only some trampled grass remained as a sign that there had been a military unit on the premises. That was a good start. It meant that they had taken the time to at least move the bones away from the door. Slowly, he circled the house, inspecting the outside for any portions in immediate need of repairs. He wouldn't lead anyone inside if there was too much rot or crumbling stonework. Then, when he got around the back, there was one oversized stone cairn with a simple stone plinth marking it as a grave. Good. They buried them properly, Dominic whispered to himself, then continued to circle the building until he was back out front. All good from the outside. Let's get everyone inside and inspect the manor. The soldiers said that it was inhabitable, but we all know that during a rainstorm that word can have a very loose definition to a traveling military unit. Dominic called, loud enough that everyone could hear him. That got everyone moving, and Dominic swung the front doors open, then paused in shock. Everything was intact. Well, all the solid pieces were intact. The drapes had been removed from the windows, the cloth of the sofa was damaged by rodents, and some of the wooden accent pieces were warped with humidity and neglect. It would be a long process getting it all back up to perfection, but in general, the house was exactly as it had been left. Alexis looked around the main hall and nodded in satisfaction. The majority of the building was stone, and all the woodwork was simply decorative trim. It could be peeled away without compromising the structure. Excellent as a fortified structure. Beth and Liz crossed the room and turned down a side hall, which made Dominic laugh. That way is the servant quarters. The kitchen is the other way, he called. Right, you've been here before, have you not? The cook asked. Dominic nodded. It's been some time, but I still remember my way to the kitchen. There are 2 floors of rooms above us, and all the office spaces, plus entertaining areas, are on the main floor. Dominic added. Alexis left to inspect the office areas, the royal guard went to the upper floors to inspect the rooms, and Pops ventured off through the main floor to see what had survived. Hey, I've got a locked door here, she called a few seconds later, bringing Dominic out of his reverie. Oh, you found the good stuff. That's the library. The next door over is the main study, and then the smoking room. Dominic explained. All 3 doors were locked, but Dominic knew how to solve that. Give me a moment, and I will see if the keys are still in the house. Nobody would typically have those keys on them, so they should still be in the house. There aren't any signs that looters even visited the place, he explained. Dominic walked down the hall toward the kitchen, and then pressed his hand to the side of a cupboard by the door. The hidden door swung open, revealing the manor's keys, still hung on their hooks. There you go, the spare master key. Keep that one safe, I don't know if we will be able to find the other copies. Dominic reminded her needlessly. After all, who knew better about the value of having the only master key to something than a princess, who always had to worry about spies, thieves and opportunists trying to get into her valuables?